I will now invite Dr. Aparna Singh to introduce our eminent speaker of the day.
Thank you, Amit. Professor Samik Bandyopadhyay is a scholar, editor, publisher, translator, lexicographer, bibliophile. He is the Rabindranath Tagore National Fellow at the School for Arts and Aesthetics, JNU, New Delhi, and member, Publication Committee, Sangeet Natak Academy, New Delhi. He was ICCR Chair at the Department of Theatre Studies, Vice Chairman, National School of Drama, and member, National School of Drama Society. Sir is among the first generation of Indian critics to take theatre and film seriously as sites of political and cultural critique. His deeper engagement with Brechtian theory and its relevance to Indian theatre reshaped the critical vocabulary around performance in India. Sir has played a central role in archiving and interpreting post-independence people's theatre movements such as IPTA and the works of dramatists like Badul Sarkar, Habib Tanveer, and Utpal Dotto. Sir has served as a senior editor with Seagull Books, Kolkata. He has curated and edited anthologies, monographs, and critical readers that remain foundational resources for students and scholars of Indian performance studies. He has worked closely with Nandikar, NSD, and Sangeet Natak Academy, contributing to their intellectual and artistic programming. He was awarded the prestigious Sangeet Natak Academy Tagore Ratna 2012 as part of the Tagore birth anniversary commemoration for his lifetime contribution to theatre criticism and cultural studies. His work is cited across disciplines: theatre studies, cultural theory, Marxist criticism, South Asian studies, and film studies, demonstrating his wide intellectual influence. We are immensely grateful and absolutely honored to have you with us today, sir. And without further ado, I request sir to enlighten us on the Indian cultural landscape 2025.
It was a pleasant surprise when the program started with a recitation of Where the Mind is Without Fear. Incidentally, I'm not sure if you're all aware that Tagore wrote a series of poems culminating in Where the Mind is Without Fear in the last few days of 1899 and the beginning of 1900. Later on, at the end of his book, Nationalism, he would add a translation, or rather, maybe not just a straight translation, but a recreation of that particular series of poems that began with the memorable poem Shatabdir Shurjo Aji Gelo Ostachale Rokto Megho Maje. And a few lines later, in the same poem, which you translate as the sunset of the century at the end of the book Nationalism, in Bengali, the words came, Lojja Sharamot Tyagi জাতি প্রেম নাম ধরি প্রচণ্ড অন্যায় ধর্মের ভাষাতে চাহে বলের বন্যায়. Words which are so meaningful today, right now, at this particular moment. And it goes into this series of poems, beginning on the midnight of the 19th century, the last day of the 19th century, moving into the 20th, What a moment. And when at the end of the book Nationalism, he translated these poems, if I had known, I would have brought the book along and would have loved to read the poem, where he adds these 5 or 6 poems together, culminating in Where the Mind is Without Fear, and writes this poem, which is more strongly, more brutally worded, because things had rolled by then, and he was right in the middle of the First World War when he writes his nationalism speeches. So, and he underscores, right under the title, The Sunset of the Century, in the book Nationalism, written on the last day of the last century. He underlines that point. So he was, in a way, foreseeing the beginning of the First World War 14 years later. And he was speaking right then of the gory power of nationalism and where it can lead to, and the need for the human mind to take a stand where the mind is without fear. So that whole history that comes alive in that poem, and all that grows around it, along with it over the years. So that, in a way, sets the background, or rather a setting, for what I'm going to say this evening. For as far as our cultural landscape in 2025 is concerned, it's again no longer the shadow of a war, but wars raging all around us. About 20 years ago, a poet friend of mine, departed now, Olokranjan Dasgupta, wrote a book called Juddhe Chhayay, In the Shadow of War. At the beginning of the book, he says how the book came up from a conversation that he was having with me, and we were talking about war. And he wrote this book. The book starts very dramatically with a quotation from the German poet, writer Ingeborg Bachmann. And in a poem, Bachmann says, wars are not declared any longer. They go on. They go on happening. So Olokranjan starts his book with that quotation from Ingeborg Bachmann, and then quotes a poem by Bachmann, and then goes on to list over about 10 pages a list of all the wars that have taken place since the declaration of ceasefire at the end of the Second World War in 1945, until 20 years ago, when Olokranjan was writing the book, there has not been a single day without a war taking place in the world somewhere or other. Not reported, not declared, not announced. Wars are no longer declared. They go on happening. They happen. That situation continues today, has worsened over the last 20-odd years. There are wars everywhere, every day. And in that global setting, when we look at our cultural landscape in our country right now, it is under the horror of a war. every day someone or other gets killed brutally anywhere in the country, all over the country, the news doesn't appear in the first page any longer. It goes into the inner pages. So this is the setting in which we talk of our cultural landscape. A war-ridden, violence-ridden, but worse than that, a situation where these are not noticed. These get into the third page or the fourth page or even the seventh page of the newspaper. Where the first 2 pages of the newspaper, most of the newspapers, the big newspapers, they don't even carry news. They carry advertisements. And once you see the advertisements and you try to calculate the price that the advertiser has paid for one full front page of the newspaper, the enormous amount of money that goes into that page of advertisement, read something else, something more sinister behind it. With all that money pouring in, buying up the press, the pages, the press, the newspaper itself is bought up. The people, the forces who spend that money in buying up the pages, buy up the conscience, the attitude, the whole purpose of the newspaper. A bought media, a media that is controlled by capital. Don't trust your news. Don't trust the coverage, the so-called coverage. More than the coverage, it is a cover-up. So, with that scenario, the media controlled by capital, capital directly involved, engaged in the war process, in the making of war, in the manipulation of the weaponry of warfare, directly engaged, where every other day a corporate magnate can declare, well, those drones that drop bombs, we made them. Those bursts of all kinds of strange weaponry, we don't even know what they are. They're described or they're announced or they're declared years later, and only then you come to know what exploded. It's the bursts all over, and somebody, some corporate manager would say, well, we made that. It was our making. And the news comes much, 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 much later. So this control over the media, control over information, the circulation of information, the circulation of basic information, even that is controlled and stunted. If that is the scenario, culture, the voice of culture, the point that Sanjukta was making a few minutes ago, the force that culture alone can generate, culture alone can assert and voice, that is terrorized and suppressed continuously. So more or less, the cultural landscape 2025 in which we are situated right now is a cultural landscape under the deepening shadow of war. We don't have a war as such, but the undeclared war continues. In the rapes, in the suicides, in the killings every day, in the acts of meaningless violence any time, any day, in any part of the country. So it is a warlike state, an undeclared war, an undeclared emergency which rules over this country along with several other countries in the world, most of the countries in the world. I can't think of a country that is untouched or unaffected by this violence overcast over the world. But what makes it worse in our country is that we had a history. We had a history of, call it post-independence, post-colonial India, the burgeoning of a culture, a new way of looking at the possibilities of culture, a sense of freedom which came in 1947, not so much on the 15th of August 1947, but more, I would say, the growing forces, the growing energies, as they were defining themselves and coming into their own in the 40s, I would say very specifically after 1942, when the Soviet Union was attacked by Nazi Germany and the war entered a different phase altogether. There was a mobilization all over the world only at that point where the intelligentsia, the entire cultural world, cultural workers all over the world, faced a crisis of civilization. It was no longer just a war. It was something more than that. A possibility of socialism, a possibility of equality that had opened up. Whatever had been the fate of that in later years is another story. I'm not going into that. We'll touch on that later on in the course of my conversation with you. But in 1942, the attack on the Soviet Union was an attack on a possibility, on a hope, on a dream, on a desire. And that was facing an assault, a terrible assault. There's a mobilization all over the world, in India also. When the left in India, they took a stand and they cut itself off from the nationalist mainstream. Initially, there was a kind of a bombardment on the left, calling the left anti-national, traitors, agents of the foreign forces, etc., etc., etc. But for the first time, there was a cultural mobilization where writers across political frontiers came to take a common stand against fascism. And you have to remember the process of thinking, the line of thinking that had begun midnight 31st December 1899, when Tagore writes that poem, and writes a series of poems naming, attacking, challenging nationalism. And when 14 years later, the First World War begins, he goes to China and Japan, condemns nationalism, becomes unpopular. He goes to China for the first time in 1916, and he is welcomed. And when he condemns nationalism, Chinese nationalism against Japanese nationalism, nationalism against nationalism, and every brand, every kind of nationalism will lead to warfare and the violence of war. And something that had begun there already, soon in 1924, or rather 1923, bursts in Italy with the rise of fascism. The word fascismo enters not Italian alone, but all the languages of the world simultaneously. A word which even culturally, visually, pictorially has its own look. The word fasces meant in Italian a binding of small, little, but strongly wooden bars. And these small bars are bound together and made into a weapon, fasces. You can use it to hit somebody, stronger, crueler, more brutal than the police batons used by the Calcutta police, because it's not a single baton. It's about 6 or 7 of these rugged, bonding pieces of wood. And for the fascist symbol, for the symbol of fascismo, for the fascisti, the fascist party, Mussolini had added something else. These small bars bound together and a hatchet put within it. And this becomes the stand, and upon the stand you have an eagle spreading out its wings. So this is fascismo, visually. And it starts with a mass of people without jobs, Italy badgered, battered by the First World War, its industry flattened, and the old Italian capitalists trying to re-emerge out of the wilderness of the devastation of the First World War, and Mussolini coming to their aid, creating this band of fascist goons and making an offer to the capitalists. I have my goons ready. I have the fascisti ready. Whatever workers you have, keep them to a minimum. Make them work as long as you want to, as brutally, as heartlessly as you want. Make them work. And if they defy you, if they raise a voice of protest, my goons, my fascisti will go to your protection and beat them up with their fasces. This was the deal. And with this deal, this massive organization of the fascisti, Mussolini organizes a demonstration where these fascist gangs, they come to Rome, they surround the Emperor of Italy, and the demand that Mussolini should be given power. Power should be handed over to him on a platter. King Emmanuel III makes a phone call to Mussolini to come down from Florence to Rome. He comes in a train, and the next morning Mussolini takes charge. Fascism comes to power. 23 in Italy, 33 in Germany, 36 in Spain. Fascist powers emerging. Now all this somehow Tagore had visualized back in 1899, and more strongly in his nationalism lectures, and ending the nationalism lectures with that series of poems brought together under the title The Sunset of the Century. So this is the history. And this history charges the new cultural movement, the new cultural mobilization against nationalism and for internationalism, a concern for the whole of the world. The world has become a place by then, by 1942, where you can't preserve your democracy, you can't preserve your civilization within the frontiers of your own country. The frontiers have been battered down with the growth and the expanse of fascism. This is the situation where in the 40s, India comes to have a different cultural program, a cultural vision. And this centers on the Indian People's Theatre Association in 1943-44. A group of people, cultural workers, fighting against, taking a position against the political nationalist mainstream of the period. They come together, people from all over India, and a major departure is made, a political cultural departure from the mainstream cultural thinking of the period. For with the rise of nationalism in India in the 1930s, there was the beginning, the emergence of a nationalist cultural voice along with nationalism. And this nationalist cultural voice harkens back to the Sanskritist tradition, the tradition of the Natya Shastra, etc., etc., etc. So these are the sources of our cultural expression. The body, the moving body of the performer, the dancer, the singer, even the artist works with his hands, his fingers. It is the body at work, and this making body, the creative body, the cultural body, this body has to be controlled in a manner and controlled by nationalism. And with this comes a revivalist trend, with the classics of the Natya Shastra, the Abhinaya Darpanam, and the Sangeet Sutrasar, the Sangeet Ratnakar. These are being revived. These are translated for the first time, and translated in different versions, rarely in the complete forms. Manmohan Ghosh's translation of the Natya Shastra was a marginal work with a very limited circulation, extremely limited circulation. There were other versions, other translations in English, in Hindi, and the other Indian languages, which were deliberately shortened versions, underlining the more rigid rules of the Shastras, turning it into a Shastric nationalism. Two traditions, dance traditions, and dance was, you can understand, in that cultural framework, a framework which had already started censoring the body, controlling the body, and giving it a kind of a nationalist prison frame. Within that framework, two dance forms were picked up. Dance forms, interestingly, the two forms, the Kathakali and the Bharatanatyam, these in the 1930s came to have a place for themselves. The first two recognized classical Indian dance forms. And very interestingly, the two forms had two institutional support bases. In Madras, it was the Kalakshetra, started by a theosophist, Rukmini Devi Arundale. And in Kerala, it was the Kerala Kalamandalam, started by Vallathala Narayan Menon, again a Christian communist. They choose these forms, joining the nationalist program, contributing to the nationalist program. But what they hid from us was something very, very important. That both these forms, Bharatanatyam in its original form and the Kathakali in its original form, were never given a place within the so-called sacred sanctum of the temple. They performed outside the sacred space. They were not allowed to come anywhere near the idol of the gods. And they were from the lower castes. They were performers. You looked down on them. They used their body. They were not minded people. That was the whole philosophy. The marginals. The marginals are brought into a special space, a cultural space, and by outsiders significantly in both the cases. They were not Hindu chauvinists, neither Rukmini Devi Arundale nor Vallathala Narayan Menon, neither of them. But these become part of the nationalist program. These are our classical dance forms. The whole question, the entire term Margi, Drupadi, these were terms that were generated at this point of time and given a kind of a nationalist branding. In 1947, when India becomes independent, there is a search for a post-colonial national identity. But whatever blame now we put on poor Nehruji, Nehru had a vision to bring these streams and other streams together and give nationalism a larger, wider, broader, all-embracing look. So in the process, a different kind of politics starts playing its role here. Two schools of thought. At one end, the IPTA school, which had moved out of the entire classical area and sought an all-India, not calling it national as such, but an all-India mobilization of the different cultural voices, bringing all the differences together. In Andheri in Bombay, an old derelict house was turned into a commune. And in this commune, artists brought down from all over India. Ravi Shankar recently married to Annapurna, and they were living there together, Ravi Shankar and Annapurna. A tram conductor singer from Calcutta, Dasarath Lal from Bihar, who had come to Calcutta and joined the tramways as a conductor and a fabulous singer, he was there. Jyotirindra Moitra would be a regular visitor. Binoy Roy, Reba Roy, Preeti Banerjee, they were there. Shanta Gandhi, Deena Gandhi, they were there. The Uday Shankar dance troupe at Almora had cracked up, so Shanti Bardhan, Gul Bardhan, Abani Shankar, Sachin Shankar, they came in. So people from all India, they were coming together. And in Bombay itself, in the laboring areas, in the laboring district of Bombay, they had discovered this fabulous Dalit writer, singer, composer, Annabhav Sathe. And Annabhav Sathe had brought together fellow workers, C.N. Gavankar and Shahir Amar Sheikh. So they were all together, living a life together in a commune. Later on, Reba Roy Chaudhary would write her autobiography where she says that we all cooked our own food. We shared in the kitchen. We worked together in the kitchen. But because Ravi Shankar and Annapurna ji, they would be doing their riwaz early in the morning, and that was almost a kind of a sacred affair. We would wash their clothes, and the little boy had just been born, so we had to take care of them while they did their riwaz. So it was a large family, a family where caste, language, location, these differences did not matter. A common cultural space was being created. A common cultural arena was coming into being. With all these different voices, trains, movements, different bodies with different voices, different languages spoken together. They created a program called India Immortal, which traveled throughout the country. But, significantly enough, while the IPTA was coalescing this different nation, a cultural nation, not a political nation, not a language singularized nation, but a cultural nation with its diversity, with one song going into the other. You must have heard so many times the Sare Jahan Se Acha in the new composition by Pandit Ravi Shankar. The version that we hear is the version that was created by Ravi Shankar ji for the IPTA as the opening song for every IPTA program. I've had occasion to listen to Jyotirindra Maitra singing the Sare Jahan Se Acha in the original tune, which is a ghazal. And it is a lover's ghazal, Sare Jahan Se Acha. It's almost a love song for the country. It's a different tune altogether. A lilting, moving, rolling kind of thing. Very, very different from Ravi Shankar's Sare Jahan Se Acha, which we hear and sing so often nowadays. So things were changing radically, dramatically in this manner at one level. And then the IPTA is banned in 1948. It remains banned from 48 to 52. Now this entire program, the program that had been chalked out, the program that was spreading, and even that program, the way it was, what should I say, how this program was programmed, this coincided, 42, 43, 44, coincided with the Bengal famine of 1943-44. And the 43-44 famine in Bengal also stirred the IPTA in Bengal. And the way IPTA responded to it was with a play by a person called Bijun Bhattacharya, who didn't like plays, who never cared for plays, who never wanted to be an actor, never. He was a singer, he was a writer in his own right, wrote stories, wrote songs, composed songs, and traveled extensively through Bengal, Bihar, Assam and Orissa. And I remember Bijunda telling me, you know, the language changes every 20 miles in this part of the country. And I know those languages. I've learned those languages. The language changes. So he brings all these languages together. He plays with these languages in his songs, in his writings. And he lives close by. It should be about 2 kilometers from this place. The location is still there. And he's a journalist. So he has to come to the newspaper office in Bagh Bazaar. The Anand Bazar Patrika, he used to work for them. And he had to cross a park. The park is still there, not in its old shape any longer naturally. Parks have vanished in Calcutta. And a group of people from the villages, starving people from the villages, had come and settled there during the famine days. And Bijunda tells me, as he passed by that park to the tram route, to catch the tram to go to Bagh Bazaar, he said, I didn't have the heart to look at them. I didn't dare look at them. The shame of it all, that people are dying here in our city. How many of them can we feed? How many of them can we save ever? With that shame, I never looked at them. I crossed that place every morning, day after day. And one day, I heard 2 of them speaking, a man and a woman. They were laughing. They were talking about last year's harvest, the new harvest. And after the corn had been cut, the way they celebrated, the way they teased one another, the joy, they were reliving those days and they were laughing. 3 or 4 days later, he saw a dead body lying there. And in a flash he thought, it could be the man speaking that day. Just could be. And he didn't dare to look at the body. Crossed it by, and he felt somebody should speak about it. But who am I to speak about it? They have to speak. And since I know their voices, I know their language, I know their speech, let me recapture their speech and let me speak for them. And if I capture their speech, if I restore, revivify their speech, it won't be a story, it won't be a poem, it won't be a song, it has to be a play. People talking, people speaking their lives. That's how he writes his first play ever. Under that urge. And he decides that when he stages this play for the IPTA, there would be no professional actors there. Actors can only act. Actors can cheat. Actors can copy. I need people who will feel that, who will not perform, who will really act it out. He picked up actors and actresses from outside the professional theatre, outside the practice of theatre, the trained practice of theatre, the cultivated practice of theatre, deliberately. And one of the actresses he chose, a relation of his, I interviewed her later on, and she shared with me her experiences before she did her first ever role on stage in Bijun Bhattacharya's Nobando. And her memory, 2 memories, I'll share her memories with you. She lived in a house on Sadananda Road, close by, and just across the road there was this empty space where some of these famine-stricken people, women and children primarily, they had taken their place. Not a shelter, not a covered place at all. Now every day, in the house where Tripti Mitra lived in those days, they would be cooking, rice would be cooked for so many people living in that house all together. And the water from the rice, the waste water, that would be thrown into the drain upstairs, which would come down by a pipe and link with the street drain. Triptidi would be standing on the veranda, looking across to the other side of the road at the settlement. And every day it was almost a ritual. When the water dripped down through the pipe and would fall into the street drain, women would come rushing, and they would have their small bowls and they would gather the waste water, and that would be their only food. They'd go back, share it with their children. The men had gone out looking for food elsewhere. It was just the women and the children. One day, something exceptional happened. A woman comes up, draws that bowl, gathers her water, waste water, goes over. 3 children, they rush up to her. They cling to her. She brushes them aside. They literally fall down, the 3 of them. She takes the bowl to her mouth, drinks it all up. The children don't cry. They're so shocked. They just stare at the mother. And she realizes only when she has almost finished it what she has done. She breaks into tears. The children come up to her. She clasps him and breaks into tears. Triptidi was studying in a morning college, Ashutosh College at that time, close to her place, and she was part of a group of volunteers, IPTA volunteers, who had come together, and every afternoon, around 1 o'clock or 1:30, they would be serving food, some sort of a food with some rice poured in, some vegetables which they'd gathered together, and these would be served to in a camp to about 30 odd women. And Triptidi would be serving the food from a small bucket. And one day, she had this other experience. She was serving the food one by one, and she looked at one of the women there. There was something in her look that told her something was wrong. She just dropped the bucket of that wallowing water, went up, held out her arm. The woman fell on it and passed away. So Triptidi would tell me, when she acted in Nobanno, every evening, these are the memories that she carried with her into the performance of just another woman like them that she was portraying there. So it was no theatrical performance. It was acting out the pain, the agony, the shame that she had endured herself. It was a theatre of a different kind altogether. And this is the theatre, in a shorter version, that travelled along with the IPTA program India Immortal. And there would be an appeal at the end of the performance of India Immortal, which are dances composed by Shanti Bardhan, with music by Ravi Shankar, small pieces from different parts of India, folk forms, different forms, not a single classical form there, but from all over India. But then centering down on a short play called Antima Abhilasha, a shorter version of Nabanna, translated into Hindi, which was performed, and then funds would be raised for the famine-stricken of Bengal. So a cultural act becomes an act in which the people from all over India, they participate in bringing succor to the starving people of Bengal, a part of India. India becomes one in a different way without going to the Natya Shastra or the Sangeet Ratnakar or the classical forms as such. Now, this was a history that was virtually stifled and destroyed with a ban on the IPTA at one level in 1948. Though India became independent in 1947, the constitution comes into operation only in 1950 with the Republic, and a different policy, a different governmental policy, which was no longer national in the older sense of the term, but national in a broader sense, and there was an incorporation of the IPTA values and principles and aims by the Nehru government in the 50s. In 1952, the post-colonial Indian cultural landscape opens up with the setting up of the three academies. All in 52, the Sahitya Academy, the Sangeet Natak Academy, and the Lalit Kala Academy, three academies. And very interestingly, part of the Nehru program, where the old nationalism agenda is sidelined and given a different character, a different national character, not the earlier character, but a mix of the two. So, very interestingly, Habib Rahman, the architect, Calcutta-based architect, Indrani Rahman and Habib, they had the first child in Calcutta, incidentally. So Habib was entrusted with the job of building the Rabindra Bhavan at the heart of Delhi on Feroz Shah Mehta Road, at the crossroads of 6 different roads coming in. That was the point chosen for the Rabindra Bhavan. And the structure that Habib created, a remarkable structure, a structure where the house has, you walk straight to the building, the house has 3 arms on 3 floors. Each arm, the 3 arms, spread out on 3 sides. Each arm is for one of the academies. So on the ground floor is the Sahitya Academy with 3 passages, 3 arms, 1 arm for the library and the archives, 1 arm for the offices, the daily offices, the working offices. On the first floor, you have cubicles, departmental cubicles, also recording studios, etc. On the third floor, on the second floor, you have the archives, the collection of materials, recordings, musical instruments, etc. And all the academies connected in the same building. The Sahitya Academy on the ground floor, the Lalit Kala Academy on the first floor, and the Sangeet Natak Academy on the second floor. So that all the cultural forms, the performing arts, the visual arts, and Sahitya, the literary arts, they remain connected, interconnected in the same building in the Rabindra Bhavan. And just outside the Rabindra Bhavan and the grounds of the Rabindra Bhavan is an open-air theatre where all these forms and the practitioners and artists of these forms, they can meet, mingle, create, share an open space. And this is at the heart of Delhi. Facing it is the National School of Drama. So all these different roads coming in, all this was planned. So facing the Rabindra Bhavan is the Prasar Bharati now, the All India Radio Doordarshan headquarters at one corner. The other corner is the National School of Drama. They're all there, around the same place, around the same circle. It was planned. So bringing all these forms together and the interactivity of these forms, so that one feeds, one supports the other, this comes into being. This is given a physical architectural identity even. So that you walk into that space and you feel that cultural continuity, the continuity of creativities in these different areas. Along with the setting up of the academies, there was also the institution of the awards. Now here the two forces, the early nationalist force and the what I would call the new nationalist force, they come into a kind of a conflict and confrontation. Both working at the same time, and there are tensions. The first sign becomes evident when the Sangeet Natak Akademi starts giving its awards. For the first 4 years, the awards are given only to the recognized classical forms. So there are awards for Hindustani Shastriya Sangeet and Carnatic Shastriya Sangeet. One for vocal, one for instrumental, 4 awards. Nothing for the other musical traditions. Similarly for dance, 4 dance forms had been recognized as classical forms. Bharatanatyam and Kathakali were already there from the 30s, and they had their institutional spaces also. The Kalakshetra in Madras and the Kalamandalam space in Kerala in Thiruvananthapuram. Now they had to have 2 other spaces for the other parts of India. It is a national planning. So 2 new classical forms were recognized, quote unquote. One was Kathak, which didn't have an institutional space at all. The Kathak had been the court dance of the Mughals, and then it had come down to the Nawabs. One of the major centers of the Kathak was Lucknow, in the court of Wazir Ali Shah. And after Wazir Ali Shah had been sent over to Calcutta, that whole system had cracked. The same thing had happened also with the classical musicians, who were court musicians basically. But thankfully, even in the period of the decadence of the Mughals, there were the Hindu Rajas or the other Nawabs, smaller Nawabs of the different states, the princely states, who came up and gave space to these musicians. So musicians from the Mughal world, they would move into Karnataka, into Maharashtra. One of the major centers, for example, of the Kirana Gharana associated with Abdul Karim Khan Sahab, that moved on to the border of Maharashtra and Karnataka in Dharwad. Dharwad was the place of Gangubai Hangal and also Bhim Singh Joshi. And also the place, incidentally, of our friend Girish Kanad, Dharwad. So Dharwad becomes a place where the Raja of Dharwad, he gives place and opportunities and recognition to these musicians, artists, etc. And with that linking of music and theatre, a very rich tradition starts growing in Maharashtra and Karnataka, where the classical music tradition and the theatrical tradition, they mingle and they create a history of their own. So while at one end the IPT history, that was incorporated at the academies, Nemi Chandra Jain was a major figure in the IPTA. The Antima Abhilasha play, which was a version of Nabanna, a shorter version in Hindi, with Tripti Mitra was not there. Nemi Chandraji and his wife, they were playing along with Shambhu Mitra in Antima Abhilasha, which travelled all over India. Nemi Chandra Jain takes charge of the Sangeet Natak Akademi and also the National School of Drama right at its beginning. So the IPTA people, they were being incorporated into the Nehruvian cultural scenario in a way at one end. So, but there also the problem comes in with the old forces and the new forces, the classical label. So Kathak had to be given an institutional space. So a Kathak Kendra was set up next to the Sangeet Natak Academy complex. Later on, private industrialists, the Shriram Industries came onto the scene. So the Bharatiya Kathak Kala Kendra became the Bharatiya Shriram Kathak Kala Kendra. So it was part central government and part the Shriram Industries. So Kathak now had a center. And in Manipur, that's also a very interesting story, how the national history and personal histories, how they get joined together. When Indira had come down to study at Shantiniketan, Shantiniketan had space at that time only for one dance tradition, the Manipuri dance tradition. And the Manipuri gurus had been in Shantiniketan right from the beginning. So Indira Gandhi had had her exposure to dance. The only dance that she had learnt was the Manipuri dance in Shantiniketan. So when this planning was being done in the 50s, and they needed a classical form from the eastern part of India, so there were one from south, one from north, two from south rather, one from the north, so one had to be from the east. And then Manipuri was chosen, but there was no single Manipuri form really. Therefore, a Manipur Dance Academy was created, the Manipur Dance Academy. So all the Manipuri forms, and interestingly enough, I'll end I've taken a lot of time already, but I'll end with the story of Manipur, which is very much part of our cultural scenario today. The shame of Manipur, I would say. So, in Manipur, my friend Ratan Thiam has a play called 9 Hills and 1 Valley. That is Manipur. That has been Manipur for so many years. 9 hills, and the 9 hills are inhabited by the tribals. The Kuki, the Zo, and the several other communities, the Nagas, they're all there in the 9 hills. And the 9 hills surround a valley. And the valley is the Manipur Valley. So Manipur is 9 hills and 1 valley together. That is Manipur. That's how Ratan Thiam and the Manipuri cultural world, they see and they recognize Manipur. And that is how the Manipur Dance Academy was conceived. It's a place where I've been there so many times. I've sat in the classes also and shared with my friends there the experience there. It has an office building, but around the building, large sprawling space of what you can call akhadas or small ashrama spaces for every single community and its dance form. So there is a space for rasa, there's a space for naga, there's a space for the kuki dance, there's a space for the thangta, which is the drums, the range of drums from the different tribes, and primarily drums. So there are separate schools spread all over the place, and all together under the same roof. So that was the Manipur Dance Academy. And the Manipuri was not just the rasa dance. In Shantiniketan, it's still primarily the rasa and a very little bit of thangta, which came in much later. So all these dance forms of Manipur, from the 9 hills and the valley, they're there. After Nehru's death, it is called the Jawaharlal Nehru Manipur Dance Academy. But as long as he was alive, it was just the Manipur Dance Academy. So these are the 4 classical dance forms that are recognized. And the awards go only to these classical dance forms for the first 5 or 6 years. And then there is a move that you can't stick to the classical forms. And why should there be only classical forms? Why not these so many different forms? And so many different forms registering, recording, celebrating so many different cultures of this country. India is not a one culture country. It is a multicultural country. And the cultural landscape must have accommodation for all these different cultures and their expressions. So over the years, at least up to the 90s, I would say for 10 years I was also a member of the General Council of the Sangeet Natak Academy, part of this whole award giving institution. And the battles that were fought, healthy, democratic battles, where different forms, different regions, with their own cultural voices, with their own cultural forms, claiming attention, and through an award, by giving an award, you recognize that particular form, that particular region in its own cultural identity, in its cultural uniqueness. So this has been a process, a very living, changing, evolving process. This has also been reflected in the National School of Drama up to a point. I've been also a part of the National School of Drama. I was vice president for 5 years, and another 5 years I was also on the board. So all these exercises have, in the last few years, in the Modi regime, come to a dead end. Absolute dead end. And the National School of Drama, for example, at one point, and through these awards, through these different studentships, fellowships that the National School gives, the more and more divergent cultures, varying cultures in the performing arts, and the maximum range of cultures you can get with the changing bodies and the changing voices and the changing sounds that people utter in their living. So that wide variety, wide divergence, that has come to a dead end in the last few years. Now what has happened is that there has been a kind of a brutal over-standardization. There is a national drama festival that the Sangeet Natak that the National School of Drama holds every year. It has been about 300 to 400 groups apply for that, which is an impossibility, which is a completely useless exercise, because how are you judged? How can you be selected? You send a video recording of your performance. It's an expensive proposition to make a proper video shoot of a full-scale performance. So third-rate, fourth-rate video versions are sent there. 4 committees, they sit on these. Now there's no way 4 small groups of 4 or 5 people each can judge 400 performances or 500 performances coming from all India and in bad video versions. So different pressure groups, pressure politics, they decide on what plays are finally selected. And you have a festival, and people try their level best to send something, different means, devious ways to get selected, because that's where the money comes from, and big money. The money that you can't earn from your own work, from your own audiences. With the ticket rates going up, you throw out your audiences. So this entire planning process, the cultural diversification process, that comes to a dead end. And the worst part of it, the IPTA tradition of the folk singers, untrained singers even coming up. Sholit Chaudhary, whose centenary we are celebrating, never had a proper training as such. Never had a proper training. But what a genius and what creativity he brings into play. So you don't have a chance for that space for creativity that the cultural landscape had created. And that's at one end, the institutional, governmental intervention, the control in different ways, and even laying down the norms so that free, independent thinking in the arts, that also is stifled, brutally stifled. And Manipur, I'll complete with the Manipur story. In the late 1960s, second half of the 1960s, our theatre friends in Delhi, they started a journal called Enact. And this was a period when the Sangeet Natak Academy, the National School of Drama, they were in the full flush of creativity. And Enact became a journal where information about theatre activities, dance activities, performing art activities from all over India could circulate. An excellently produced journal which lasted till the late 80s. Edited by a dear departed friend, Rajinder Paul. Now, it's through Enact that we first came to know about the existence of a Manipuri theatre. The Manipuri language, you know, is so very different. It belongs to the Tibeto-Burman group of languages. It has no connection with any of the major Indian languages. Very difficult to understand. And very funnily and strangely, the script for so many years has been the Bangla script. So a Tibeto-Burman language, the script is Bangla. So the first time I went to Manipur, it was such a shock, a culture shock. You see all the names and the signboards in Bangla, and you don't understand a single word because they're all in a different language. But the script is Bangla. That's another whole history, but leave that out for the moment. Now, for the first time, through the Manipur Dance Academy, and Suresh Avasthi at that point of time was the secretary of the Sangeet Natak Academy, and it was his routine job to go and inspect and advise the Manipur Dance Academy, which was directly under the Sangeet Natak Academy, which had set it up. And there he saw a modern Manipuri play. And he was very struck by it. So he brought translations of the play down to Delhi, and they appeared in Enact. So a young playwright called N. Sribiran and a young theatre scholar, Lokendra Singh, they were identified and they contributed to that magazine, to that journal, that special issue. The Sangeet Natak Academy gave a grant, a travel grant, to Sribiran and Lokendra to travel throughout India. They hadn't seen any Indian play ever. Manipur was cut off from the rest of the country. So they were given a grant to travel to the major theatre cities of India. They came down to Calcutta, and the Sangeet Natak Academy wrote to me to take care of them. So I took them around. They stayed for about 15 days, watched many plays here. I took them to Shambhu Mitra, Ajitesh Banerjee, Tripti Mitra, Sabita Pratadatta, Bijon Bhattacharya. They met all of these people. They went back. Next year they invited me to a cultural conference there, a literary conference rather. It was kind of a return visit offered to me because I had taken them round. And there, for the first time in my life, I saw a Manipuri play, Kaboi Kayoiba, written and directed by Haisnam Kanhailal, who passed away a few years ago. It was a fabulous play. It's a folk tale from the region itself. It's a folk tale, variants of which would be there in different Indian languages and all over Southeast Asia also, as we later found out. It's a story of 7 brothers and 1 sister. In Bengali, we have the Shat Bhai Jampa. So the 7 brothers, they're strong, and there is a Rakshasa, a demon, who is around the place, and every day he must be given a human being to eat. So every house has to give one of its members for the dinner of the Rakshasa. Now these 7 strong men, the play opens with the 7 men going out for work and shutting the door of the house and singing the song, a Kabui Kayoiba song, a beautiful lilting song. They sing it, the girl, the sister, only sister joins them, and they say, you will be opening the door only if someone sings this song, not otherwise. And they go away. And then the Rakshasa comes, and that day the Rakshasa has been given a young woman. And the young woman, not a young woman, an old woman rather, sorry. And the old woman pleads for her life. So the Rakshasa and the woman. And the old woman tells the Rakshasa, now in this house there is a young woman, a lonely young woman. And she's young, she's attractive, she's all luscious, she's all flesh. What will you do with me? Tempts the Rakshasa and tells him that you just have to learn this song. And if you can sing this song, she'll open the door and you can have her. Why take me? So it's a life and death struggle for this old woman. She's going to save herself. And the Rakshasa is supposed a person to be who can't sing. No singing for Rakshasas. So he desperately tries to sing. So the whole play is this woman singing fabulously, this old woman, singing the Kabui Kayoiba song, and the Rakshasa trying to imitate her and failing and becoming vengeful, attacking her, then she moves away, sings the song again. So the entire play is about the song sung so beautifully by Savitri Haisram, who is still around, a fabulous actress, and the Rakshasa trying to sing it and can't, till he is able. He sings it, the woman moves away, the door opens, he grabs the girl inside and runs out. The 7 brothers come back and they see the door open and they realize what has happened. They sing the Kabui Kayoiba song once again, and then they turn to, and somebody from the audience, obviously part of the performance, somebody from the audience says, it's boring. It's the same song you're singing again and again in the same way. So then they start wriggling and singing the same song in a Hindi film song tune. The same song, the Kabui Kayoiba song. And brutally, they say, this is what you want? And one of these boys, these actors, jumps into the audience right from the stage, catches hold of somebody, drags him up onto the stage, literally drags him up to the stage, pushes him down and says, this is what you were waiting for. Isn't it so? There's a brutal power and energy burst of it. And then suddenly, from backstage, there's the scream of a woman. Obviously, their sister has been killed. And they're the clients. So it was a discovery for me, that kind of dramaturgy. And then both these directors, Kanailal and Ratan Thiyam, have been 2 of the major directors of our country, and a whole theatre tradition has opened up in Manipur. And side by side, something that's very important is that a whole new cinema also began. Incidentally, the first filmmaker, Aribam Shyam Sharma, who was a student in Shantiniketan at Bishop Bharati, a student of philosophy, and was teaching philosophy at the DM College in Imphal. He is the first major filmmaker, modern filmmaker in Manipur. And I'll finish with a film by him, a film called Ishanu. Ishanu, the word means the chosen one. Now, there is a belief, and it's still there in Manipur, that certain women, they are possessed by a spirit. And very interestingly, the gods, they're called Lais, L-A-I, Lais. the Lais live in the hills. And the hills are these, now in the newspapers, these are the Kuki, Mizo, Naga hills. The gods all live there because they have to live high up. And they fall in love with mortal women, women in the valley. And they possess the woman. They choose a woman and they possess her. And the woman shows certain symptoms of being under a certain spell. And they are called Maibis. So this is the story of a Maibi. The film starts very realistically, naturalistically, in contemporary Imphal, in the marketplace. And as you know, the women run the marketplaces there. They are market women, wholesalers, retailers, huge markets, women's markets. The Nupis, they're called Nupis, the Nupi markets. So it starts in a Nupi market. The young man and his wife, they come in on a bike, and they talk to the mother, who is a wholesale businesswoman, reports to her, talks business with her, family business with her. Then they go away, husband and wife, on the bike. At one point, the wife gets down, give me a minute, and she falls under this spell. She starts singing, she starts moving strangely. For a while, she isn't aware of her surroundings. Then the man is surprised, but the man knows about this affair, this whole business of the Maibi spell. He realizes what's happening, brings her back home. The family tries all the possible means, brings in Gunins and others to cure her of that spell. It doesn't work, she runs away. That's the common business thing. And there are signs of this spell. For example, a particular fish. If he sees that fish, she will have an allergy. She screams and shrieks at the sight of that fish. The Shini Mach. So these are the signs. So she falls under the spell. She leaves the house. She trains as a Maibi. Finds out other Maibis of the same kind. Trains how to lead rituals, conduct rituals that only the Maibis can. She comes back after 3 months after the training. Meanwhile, the mother, the matriarch, has sent her little child, she has a small child, to boarding school, and the husband has taken a transfer to some other city. But she can stay with the mother, or rather the mother-in-law, with the mother. But without a child, she finds no sense in that. So she joins the Maibis and goes around performing the rituals, conducting the rituals with the Maibis. The film ends in a situation where there is a huge ceremony, the worship of the different Lais, of the different gods, and the Maibis alone have the right to go to the sacred space where the Lai, the particular god, is worshipped. Only the Maibis can enter that sacred space and dance and say prayers, sing prayers to the gods. As she dances there, she finds out, or rather she notices, that her daughter is there. 10 years have gone by, the daughter is gone with her husband at a distance. It's a Mela kind of situation, with the ceremony taking place and the Mela all around, the stalls, etc. She goes up to her husband and asks her, does she know? The husband says no. And she turns away. The child sees her, no question of recognizing her, but this is a Maibi, the sacred woman. So she falls at her feet, pays obeisance. She blesses her, goes back and joins the Maibis again. And the film ends not with the end, but with the word Ishanu, the chosen one. And this is the price of being chosen by a god. the cruelty of the custom, the exposure of it, and a fabulous film. Now, I am deeply pained and shocked that for the last 3 years at a stretch, really, nothing of this is there in Manipur. Because all the theatre, all the cinema, and great work, and from 73 onwards till 2017 I should say, every year I've been to Manipur and I've watched and shared in this great cultural field of Manipur. And all that is stifled and killed forever. Because all these acts were combined acts of the 9 hills and the 1 valley. Thank you.
Spellbound, something I haven't heard ever in my life. Fantastic.
Yes. Thank you, sir. On behalf of Colloquy Development and Policy Dialogue, I extend our heartfelt gratitude for this enlightening, mesmerizing, thought-provoking lecture. We are especially grateful for your remarkable weaving of history, literature, architecture, performing arts, with the contemporary challenges with such clarity and passion. Your reflections beautifully captured the layered, evolving nature of Indian culture vis-a-vis the nationalist ideology. Your lecture reminded us that Indian thought and culture should operate through context-sensitive pluralism rather than the rigid universalism of an overweening capitalist logic. You mentioned how the IPTA took a position against mainstream nationalist cultural ideology voice, and how it coalesced a cultural, it attempted to coalesce a cultural nation with one song, going into another. Your words have not only inspired us, but have also challenged us to think deeper and act more consciously. Your words have left us so much more richer in thought and spirit. Thank you so much, sir. Now I would now open the floor for questions, and if you have any questions, we can take them. Yes, please keep the questions short so that we can accommodate as many as possible.
In cultural landscape, diversity and standardization, this conflict. But I think other countries, like even Europe, they also move from diversity to some kind of standardization. And that might be true with so-called economic development and all that. People will, the cultures will converge to some standardization. Like whatever is happening in China also now, as I understand.
Now, I think to answer that question, it is very difficult to generalize. And I think the Indian experience, I try to cover a lot of area, but lots of areas obviously are left out, have been left out. You can't bring all that together. But I think every country has a different kind of a cultural history. And even now, for example, and I think it's very difficult to really gauge the quality, the intricacies of this whole complex experience, the way we are enmeshed in it in India, that we can talk about, even within that enmeshment. Now, just one little thing. I spent about 3 months and a half in Germany teaching in 2014. So it's already a decade over. But what I noticed very interestingly, I was basically in Berlin, made a short trip to Heidelberg, Hirschberg, spent 2 days with Auruk Ranjan Dasgupta and went to Heidelberg and saw the Roman ruins in Heidelberg. That was what most excited me. The Roman ruins in Britain and the Roman ruins in Heidelberg. Great. But what I found very interesting in Germany, so it's one situation, and I was studying it and I had the time to study it also, is that, say, in Germany, in Berlin, there are 4 theaters completely owned, controlled by the state. Okay. Funded totally, lavishly funded, 4 theaters. There are other smaller theaters, etc., but 4 are officially funded state theaters. Brecht's Berliner Ensemble is one of them. There's another theater which also has a very interesting history. It's called the Volksbühne. The Volksbühne is People's Theater. Bühne is theater, Volks is people's. The Volksbühne came into being in 1919 rather, with the Weimar Republic. The first German Republic, the Weimar Republic, short-lived under Social Democratic Party leadership, which cracked very soon with the rise of fascism, the killing of Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht. Incidentally, the Volksbühne was a direct product of the Weimar Revolution. The Weimar state came into being, and it was a declared policy that the Weimar Republic should have a theater of its own and a people's theater, a Volksbühne. That's why the name, and that's how it was set up, officially by the Weimar Republic. And very interestingly, the location of the Volksbühne is right before the old building. The building is no longer there, I'm coming to that, but it was set up right before the headquarters of the Communist Party. Right before that, the Volksbühne building structure. And Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht were killed about 100 yards away from the Volksbühne. They were leading a procession. It was attacked by the fascist goons. They were dragged out from the demonstration. They were brutally killed, and they were dropped into the river Spey that runs through Berlin. The bodies were discovered 4 days later. Now, after the war, that whole area was razed to the ground by aerial bombing by the Americans. So now they've reconstructed the Volksbühne, the old architecture as it was, with a spire at the top, exactly the old architecture. The Communist Party office behind, that has also been reconstructed. In 1933, the Communist Party office was occupied by the Nazi Party and turned into the Nazi headquarters, deliberately, understandably. But now it is the office of the left, Die Linke, as they call themselves now, the combined left front. So it's their office now, and the old architecture is there. The Volksbühne has its own architecture, but all the rest of the houses nearby, which were not heritage buildings as such, and they were razed to the ground, so that has been cleared. So it is a square now, with benches where people can sit, and right beneath it is the metro station, which is the Rosa Luxemburg Platz. And this is the Rosa Luxemburg Platz, and the railway station is called the Rosa Luxemburg Platz. So you climb up from there and you hit this place. This is a large square, an empty square, with a Karl Liebknecht statement written on the floor itself, on the ground, at one end, and a Rosa Luxemburg statement line written there. And benches people can sit around the building of the Volksbühne. Now the Volksbühne has a spiral ending. The director of the Volksbühne, when I was there, is a communist. So he has put up a globe on top of the spire, and on the globe it revolves, and it says the East. So it is in West Germany, old West Germany in a way, but he's looking to the East. He can declare that a completely state-funded, state-run institution. Same with the balloon ensemble. So a capitalist government, and Germany is still, now with the rise of the right, what's going to happen is a different story, but is one of the most stable capitalist economies of the world, Germany. So what they have decided and what they do, they allow this democratic space so that you can express your opinion, you have the freedom for that. Say whatever you like against the government, etc. Make that allowance, support it even. Support the balloon ensemble even. So allow culture a space, a breathing space. So only a self-confident capitalist government can afford to do that, but a government which is to, and they can keep the balance between capital and the state, which Germany has handled wonderfully. But in countries like ours, where the state sells out to capital and the media, you can't expect that liberal attitude. So I saw this German experience, I had this German experience. I'm sure there are some countries, probably in Scandinavia, etc., which are more comfortable as capitalist countries, capitalist entities. They could afford this.
Thank you so much, sir.
We have to.
Yes, we need to wrap up now. I wish this session could have continued longer. We have so many more questions that we would have liked to ask, but then we'll have to wrap it up now. And now I request Dr. Amit Shankar Shah to please give the vote of thanks.
So at the end of this amazing thought-provoking session, I take this opportunity to thank Shri Samik Bandyopadhyay for sparing his valuable time in speaking on a pertinent topic with such erudition. I thank the President of CDPD, Professor Sanjukta Dasgupta, the Secretary, Professor Ishita Mukhopadhyay, the Treasurer, Mr. Kanchan Dotto, who is not here since he is out of station, for making this session possible with their vision and support. I thank Ms. Rituparna Khan for managing the logistics and my co-anchor Dr. Aparna Singh for coordinating the event. I thank all the other members of CDPD for their active participation. I thank ICCR for the space and the people who are involved, responsible for the sound system, for the support. I thank all the members of the audience for being here, those who are members of CDPD and those who also intend to become members of CDPD. We have the membership form on the website, as well as there is a Google form, so where we can share it with you. And those who want to renew their membership also, they can also do so. So in the Google form, we have the PhonePe link also, PhonePe number also. So like it's an overwhelming experience after listening to Shri Samik Bandyopadhyay, and I hope all of you have been enriched highly, and obviously we will have the video on the website soon. So with that, we end this session. Thank you very much. Yeah, come for a group photo.
And I thank Dr. Amit Shankar Shah for the thank you note.